Hello, my name's Dan Roberts. I'm a psychotherapist, writer and teacher, an advanced accredited Schema therapist, trainer and supervisor, and also the founder of Heal Your Trauma. And this webinar is entitled How to Calm Your Anxious Mind. And we have three key questions that I'm going to answer today. First one is, why do we feel anxiety? What's it for? Second is, what's the link between worry and anxiety? They're often confused, but they're not the same thing. And then thirdly, which experiential exercises like breathing, guided meditations, journaling, and imagery will help you to manage your debilitating worry and anxiety? So let's start with that first question. Why do we feel anxiety? I think if we are struggling with anxiety, it can be really hard to understand why we feel it. What's the point of this intense, often very unpleasant feeling? I think that's especially true if you have an anxiety disorder like health anxiety, social anxiety, OCD, or a phobia. You might very well want to get rid of your anxiety or sort of wish you could just feel calm all the time. And I think that's totally understandable, because anxiety feels horrible. It's literally painful for us, like a seized up back, like this poor guy in the picture. And actually, emotional and physical pain share the same brain circuitry. So the same brain regions are responsible for generating both different kinds of pain. Problem is, if we never felt anxiety, we would actually be in big trouble. And in fact, we might not survive for very long. So as we'll see, it's actually a very important emotion for us to feel. And this is because anxiety is like your brain's alarm signal. Essentially, anxiety warns us that something is threatening or dangerous and that we should do something about it now. And essentially, what anxiety is telling us is run, get away from, run, escape from the threatening thing. Sadly, we know that if you experience trauma in your childhood, you're much more likely to feel anxious, hypervigilant, threatened, and unsafe. And that's probably because it was true for you as a child that maybe you were unsafe in your home. And so what happens is the threat system in your brain has stayed, sort of like it stayed switched on, and it's primed for scary or hurtful things to happen, even if sort of rationally, you now know you're an adult, you're not a child, and you're safe day to day. Unfortunately, the parts of your brain that are responsible for keeping you safe don't really know that, and they're just switched on all the time, even when they don't need to be. Now, whether you experience trauma or not, it's just helpful to understand that anxiety is the emotional expression of flight in the fight, flight, freeze response. And these are self-protective reactions that have been laid down and honed to perfection by millions of years of evolution. And they are really, really useful, perfect for escaping a hungry lion, like this guy who's looking at us a bit ominously. That's what these reactions are for. They're to protect you from genuine life or death threats, like a hungry lion, like stepping out into the street when a bus is hurtling towards you. Anxiety, fight, flight, freeze are extremely helpful in those situations because they literally will keep you alive. So we obviously don't want to get rid of them. But of course, anxiety is not so helpful if you have to make a presentation at work, if you struggle with public speaking like millions of people do in the UK alone. If you're going on a first date, can be a pretty anxiety-provoking experience. Or like this poor woman, you're lying awake at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're freaking out about a tricky meeting tomorrow. So it's just helpful to remember that we can't get rid of the anxiety, even if that would be a good idea, which we kind of know that it wouldn't. Like we can't get rid of physical pain. We have physical pain to warn us, for example, that we're putting our hand in a fire and our hand is being burned. And if we didn't experience pain, we wouldn't know that, and we just leave our hand in there, and that would obviously be bad. So we can't get rid of anxiety, but what we can do is learn how to reduce it to manageable levels and develop skills for coping with anxiety. So we move from an experience of overwhelming and debilitating anxiety to one which is manageable and just mildly uncomfortable. Okay, so let's move on to the second question that I want to answer today. So often my clients say to me, Dan, I feel worried. I'm feeling so worried right now. And I have to gently correct them and explain that actually worry isn't a feeling. And so what they're doing is they're confusing worry, which is a thought process, a way of thinking, with anxiety, which is a feeling. And worry is the thinking process that we engage in when we feel anxious. And mental health professionals like myself call worries what if thoughts. So we might think, what if my son fails that exam? What if I get sacked tomorrow? You know, commonly these catastrophic, negative what if thoughts about the future. And worry is essentially problem solving. And what we're doing and what we can uniquely do as human beings with this huge supercomputer we have in our brain, particularly the cortical layer, which is the kind of outside layer of the brain, which only humans have. Gerbils don't have it, cats don't, dogs don't, only humans have that. And that allows us to project into the future and imagine every bad thing that could happen in order to come up with solutions, which is super helpful, which is why we're doing so well on the planet, because we have the ability to imagine bad things that are coming up and then figure out how to solve them before they happen. It's extremely helpful to do that. But again, of course, worry can be very unhelpful for us. And it's particularly unhelpful, I think, if we're doing that thing of projecting into the future and we're living through these endless, scary, upsetting, painful scenarios, 98% of which never happen. All those what-if thoughts, most of the time they don't happen, they don't come true. So we're living through things, horrible things that never happen to us. And the other problem we can have is we don't even come up with solutions to all those problems. We just think about them obsessively. You know, worry is so obsessive, isn't it? It's like we latch onto something and then we can't let go of it. We think and think and think about it and we make ourselves crazy. So let's start moving into thinking about how we can work with both anxiety and worry. And in order to do that, we first need to understand the concept of parts of our personality. So what is a part? It's something I talk a lot about in my teaching, in my writing, on my blog, my webinars, my workshops. And there are lots of different psychotherapy models that are based on this idea of multiplicity of self. It's a bit of a mouthful, but what it means is that we're not just one self, we're not just one homogeneous blob of self. So of course I feel like Dan all the time. I look in the mirror, there's Dan. People speak to me, they say, hey Dan, how are you? Of course I feel like just me. But we know from all the neuroscience research, we know from lots of psychological research that it's not really how the brain creates the self. The brain creates us in different parts. And in different models, we call those parts different things. So sometimes they're called subpersonalities. In schema therapy, which is my main therapy model, we call them modes. In internal family systems, which is another great therapy model, they're called parts. I tend to go with parts because I think that's what we naturally call them, don't we? We say, part of me likes this, part of me likes that. Part of me wants to go to the party or on the date, another part really doesn't. You know, it's just sort of natural for us to speak that way. We also know that when we experience trauma, the brain creates more of these parts to hold traumatic memories and help us cope with the impact of the trauma, which is what your brain is always trying to do, trying to protect you, trying to help you. And sometimes these parts can be what we call compartmentalized, which means they hold painful memories that you can't consciously access. And again, that's very helpful. There may be stuff that's overwhelming, so your brain doesn't want you to think about it too much at the time. And so again, we see that neuroscience has established that the way your brain creates you, what feels like you, is to develop these inner parts. And we have some pretty archetypal parts like the critic. Everyone has some kind of inner critic, just your self-critical thinking. Many of us can have an inner perfectionist. We can avoid things, especially things that make us feel anxious. We're pretty much always going to avoid stuff like that. We might have a soother part, which gets us to drink alcohol or eat sugary food to numb out painful feelings. And we might have a worrier part, which we're going to look at a bit more in a second, which is the part of us that does all that worrying, that thinks all those what-if thoughts. And crucially, we all have an inner child inside who holds painful memories, thoughts, beliefs, feelings, and experiences from childhood. And a key aim of healing from trauma or any other psychological problem is helping that young part feel calmer, happier, more peaceful, and safer in the world. So here is what in schema therapy we would call a mode map. So kind of a map of these different parts. And here is Jenny. This is a fictional client that I've created. And Jenny struggles with chronic obsessional worry and health anxiety. And so if we see, you've just put 4 of these different parts on her map, we can see over there we have a critic. This is all the self-critical thoughts that she has. We have little Jenny, which is that inner child who feels extremely anxious, excuse me, and panicky. Really struggles with health anxiety, which is just her absolute Achilles heel. And little Jenny's hypervigilant and tense because she's so anxious so much of the time. And here we have the warrior. See, the warrior is trying to help little Jenny to deal with all this anxiety, with obsessional thinking, constant worry, lots of what-if thoughts. And finally, we have the part that we call the healthy adult. And the healthy adult is the part that lives here in the prefrontal cortex. This is the sort of part of the brain that can do rational thinking, can do logical thinking, that sees the big picture, and also the part that can be compassionate and kind to the more anxious, hurt parts, like little Jenny. So Jenny's healthy adult can do reasonable and rational thinking, sees the big picture, doesn't get bogged down in detail, is kind, compassionate, and is a kind of inner good parent to little Jenny, like looking after that very anxious part. And so if we were doing therapy together, we would draw a map like this. And it's really helpful, I think, to both to start to understand, okay, there's a young part of me in here, which is very anxious. And then there's a worrier that does lots of worrying to try and help me with my anxiety. Trying to help. Might not be so helpful, but it's definitely trying to help. We have the critic who can be quite harsh, and the critic you see can trigger little Jenny with these very critical thoughts. But then we have this other part, the healthy adult, which is reasonable, which is kind, and that's the part that we're really looking to develop. And I just wanted to give you a bit of a taste of this, and we're going to do an exercise in a minute, which really will help you to kind of get to know a little bit and work with your anxious child inside. Okay, so let's change gears a little bit from doing sort of teaching and thinking about and learning. If you're using a pad and a pen, you could just put that down now. And I'm just going to teach you a breathing practice, which I teach to all of my clients, and I use myself. I find it extremely helpful. And I call it compassionate breathing. And this is a very helpful breathing technique to use whenever you're feeling anxious or stressed or struggling with worry, just to calm yourself down, to do what we call regulate your nervous system, which is just to get your whole internal nervous system just to kind of calm down, slow down, feel a bit more peaceful and relaxed. So I also use it as part of a 4-stage practice on self-compassion, which we're not going to get into too much today. But I will be running workshops on self-compassion, so do come along to those if you're interested in that very powerful, important healing technique that we can use. So what we do is we always start with adjusting posture. So I want you to make sure your feet are nice and grounded on the floor. I want you to just gently roll your shoulders back, feel your chest opening up, and lengthen your spine. Imagine an invisible piece of string from the top of your head, just pulling your head and neck and spine in alignment. And you should be sitting upright but relaxed. Just see, how does that feel in your body? Just notice you might feel a tiny bit stronger, a little bit more grounded, a little bit more present. Then close your eyes. Let's add some compassionate breathing. So take some deep, slow breaths in through your nose and out through your mouth. And we want roughly 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. So try counting those breaths. 4 seconds on the in-breath, 4 seconds on the out-breath. And as you're breathing, imagine that your abdomen is like a balloon, inflating on the in-breath, deflating, falling away on the out-breath. Just keep breathing deeply. Just going to stay with this for another minute. And then you can just open your eyes. Just take a moment to see how you're feeling. You might be feeling a tiny bit calmer, a little bit more peaceful, a tiny bit more relaxed. And if not, that's okay too. But if you are, that's wonderful. And that was like a couple of minutes of breathing. I think this, and there are many other breathing techniques. Again, I will teach those breathing techniques on my workshops if you want to come along to those. Lots of different deep breathing techniques that all do different things, really. I think this is quite a sort of gentle technique, but I do find it can help you just to a minute or 2 minutes of deep breathing can really help to move you out of that fight, flight, freeze state into what we call rest and digest state, which is, obviously you can rest, you can sleep, you can eat food, you can digest the food. It's like the opposite of fight, flight, really. So I'd really encourage you to use this breathing technique often throughout the day. Again, you can come along to my workshops. I'm going to be doing a workshop on anxiety regularly at the Gestalt Centre in central London. I'll talk more about that a bit later. And I also recorded this and many other practices for the Insight Timer app. And there'll be a link to that at the end of the webinar. And all of those practices are free. So you can listen to those anytime you want. The app is free, the practices are free, so it's completely free. No need to pay for them, and would be really helpful for you to use this breathing technique often throughout the day, especially when you're feeling a bit anxious. Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to move into doing an exercise. And I call this exercise calming your anxious inner child. So remember we saw Jenny's inner child just now. Little Jenny felt very anxious, a lot of health anxiety, very tense, very hypervigilant. And this is a really helpful exercise for calming down your inner child, who probably does feel pretty anxious, so needs to just relax a bit. So start by switching your phone to silent if it isn't silent already, just to make sure you won't be disturbed. Then sit on a comfortable chair. Again, feet nice and grounded on the floor. Let's gently roll your shoulders back, lengthen your spine. Close your eyes. Take some slow, deep breaths, just like we did just now. In through your nose, out through your mouth. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. Let's just sit with the breath again for another minute, just allowing yourself to settle down, slow down, calm down a little bit. Now, if you are feeling at all anxious right now, just locate that anxious feeling in your body. Anxiety often shows up in the stomach, or it might be your chest, especially around the solar plexus, which is just between and just below your pectoral muscles. You might notice butterflies, tension, or a knot in your stomach, a feeling of nervous energy or tightness or tension in your chest. Now send some breaths into this part of your body. Don't try and switch off or get rid of the feelings and sensations. Just breathe into them. Keep sending warm, friendly, compassionate breath into your throat, shoulders, chest, or belly. And just sit with that for a minute. As you're breathing into those parts of the body which are holding tension and tightness, see if you notice them just start to soften, even a little. Place a hand on your body wherever you feel the uncomfortable sensations of anxiety in a warm, soft, supported manner, like you place your hand on the shoulder of a friend who is upset. Feel the warmth from your hand begin to spread into the skin and muscles. Send that warmth, along with the breath, into the tense, anxious places in your body. Now, I want you to visualize yourself as a child. It can help to have a photo of yourself, especially at a young age, and one you feel warmly towards. That's because it's common for us to have complicated feelings towards our vulnerable child, especially if we experience trauma in our childhood. And as you're visualizing that image of you, if you're struggling to feel warmth or compassion towards little you, just imagine your own child, a niece, a nephew, or a friend's child you're fond of. Just imagine that they're feeling scared and think about how you would respond to them. What words would you use? What would your tone of voice be? You'd probably speak a bit more slowly and use a warm, friendly, reassuring voice tone. That's the tone you need to comfort the child inside you. And now come back to the photo of little you, or just an image of yourself in your mind's eye. Speak to them from your warm, wise, compassionate, healthy adult. You can do this out loud, or just think the messages to them inside. Let them know you get that they're scared right now. Tell them that's perfectly natural. There's a lot to be scared about in the world, especially at the moment. But you can also reassure them, not in a fake, everything's fine way, but rationally and authentically, telling them that, for example, it's okay if your spouse is angry with you, because adult you can handle a little conflict. Or you might say it's normal to worry about problems with your health, but adult you will visit the doctor to make sure everything's fine. Keep soothing and reassuring them in this calm, friendly, rational way. And then don't try and force this, just do what feels natural. Let them know you care about or even love them. Sit with that for a few seconds, feeling that internal connection between your healthy adult and little you. Finally, see if there are any good feelings inside. You might feel a bit calmer, more relaxed, lighter in your body, or a sense of inner warmth. If so, just enjoy those feelings for a while. Let them soak into your body for at least 30 seconds. Then take a deep breath and open your eyes. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that and found it helpful. Excuse me. As with all techniques like this, just remember that the first time we try it, it might be great, might work really well, and sometimes it might be tricky. It's very normal for it to be a bit difficult at first. I think it's really helpful to remember that very few things do we get perfectly the first time. You want to really practice them over and over again. So I'm about to record this for my Insight Timer collection. It will be there. You can use it. Again, this will be a thing that I'll be teaching on my workshops, so you can do it with me in person. And just practice. Just practice the breathing, practice this, practice other calming techniques over and over and over and over and over. It's never just once, once a day or multiple times a day. And the more you do it, the more helpful it will become, the more effective it will become. Like everything, we just need to practice and it becomes more helpful for us. Okay, so finally, we're just going to have a reading. And this is a wonderful poem called Courage by Anne Sexton. I chose this image because I thought that represents courage quite well for me. I did that once and it certainly took a lot of courage to do. So I'm going to suggest again, you can just close your eyes, just relax and just listen to this poem. It is in the small things we see it. The child's first step, as awesome as an earthquake. The first time you rode a bike, wallowing up the sidewalk. The first spanking when your heart went on a journey all alone. When they called you crybaby or poor or fatty or crazy and made you into an alien, you drank their acid and concealed it. Later, if you faced the death of bombs and bullets, you did not do it with a banner. You did it with only a hat to cover your heart. You did not fondle the weakness inside you, though it was there. Your courage was a small coal that you kept swallowing. If your buddy saved you and died himself in so doing, then his courage was not courage, it was love. Love as simple as shaving soap. Later, if you have endured a great despair, then you did it alone. Getting a transfusion from the fire, picking the scabs off your heart, then wringing it out like a sock. Next, my kinsman, you powdered your sorrow. You gave it a back rub, and then you covered it with a blanket. And after it had slept a while, it woke to the wings of the roses and was transformed. Later, when you face old age and its natural conclusion, your courage will still be shown in the little ways. Each spring will be a sword you'll sharpen. Those you love will live in a fever of love. And you'll bargain with the calendar. And at the last moment, when death opens the back door and you'll put on your carpet slippers and stride out. So I love that poem, and I think it speaks so well to the fact that courage means facing our fears. It means accepting that we feel anxious sometimes, because that's normal, that's human. And it's the way we deal with our anxiety, it's the way we respond that's so important. And we can all do that with courage, because we have courage within us, however hard things have been for us. It's just so helpful to remember that. So just to sum up, if you struggle with debilitating or overwhelming anxiety, it's completely natural and understandable if you want to get rid of it and never feel that anxiety again. And this is especially true if you've experienced childhood trauma and or you have an anxiety disorder like a phobia or social anxiety, health anxiety or OCD. But as we've seen, not only is it impossible to get rid of anxiety, it would actually be a really bad idea. We need anxiety as the emotional alarm bell that warns us when something threatening or dangerous is happening and that we need to take action now. It's also helpful to understand that there's a part of us that feels anxious, which is your inner child, and another part that worries to try and help with the anxiety, which we call the worrier part. And we can work with these parts using trauma-informed therapy, webinars, workshops, self-help books to calm and soothe the anxious child and help the worrier just to calm down, stop being so hypervigilant. And proven practices like compassionate breathing, imagery techniques, guided meditations can help us feel calmer, safer, and more at peace. So I very much hope you've enjoyed that webinar. It was a pleasure to be with you today. Just as I flagged a couple of times, so I do have a collection of breathing techniques, guided meditations, imagery, exercises on Insight Timer. Here's the link to my Insight Timer collection. I run a series of in-person workshops at the Gestalt Centre, which is near King's Cross in central London. And the next one is coming up in September. There'll be another one in November. This is 2022, if you're watching in real time. But do just check out my website, danroberts.com, where I constantly update my latest website, my latest workshop, and you can just book very easily through my website. There's also my Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram handles, so you can check me out there too. I so hope that's been helpful for you today. I really hope that it helps a little bit with your anxiety and worry. And I look forward very much to seeing you, hopefully in person, at one of my workshops soon. Thank you so much for being with me today. Take care.